Spirit and kindle the fire that is in us. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hearts and see through them. Take our souls and set them on fire. Amen. Well, the Judean wilderness is a desolate, desolate place. It's not a desert, but it's very inhospitable. I mean, you wouldn't want to live there. You wouldn't want a vacation there. You certainly wouldn't want to go there alone, because that would be quite dangerous. But that is exactly what Jesus did. He went into the wilderness. He went alone. And he went without food for 40 days and 40 nights. That's the same amount of time that Moses spent up on the mountain with God. It's also the same amount of time that it took Elijah to travel without food or water to the mountain of God where he experienced God. Not in the whirlwind, not in the earthquake, but in the sound of sheer silence. Why did Jesus go? Why did he go into the wilderness? He went there because he was led there. The Holy Spirit led him there. At his baptism, the Holy Spirit comes upon him and anoints him for his ministry. And then immediately afterwards, the Holy Spirit leads him into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, the Satan, that ancient prosecutor, that ancient tester of human faith. Jesus was to be tried and tested because of this. An apple. It's Adam's apple. Now, of course, we don't know what the fruit actually was that Adam and Eve ate that led to the downfall of creation. It was certainly not an apple, and most assuredly not a gala apple from Dylan's. This is why Jesus went into the wilderness. He went to undo what Adam had done. And he did this by taking the same test that Adam had taken. Now, it wasn't exactly the same test. It was actually much harder. And the contrast between the tests is quite striking. Adam's test took place in a well-watered garden. Some people would call it paradise. Jesus' test took place in the wilderness, a dry, desolate place. Adam could eat freely of every tree in the garden, save one. Jesus had no food at all. Adam was commanded to not eat from the tree that was in the middle of the garden. And yet, when he was approached by the serpent, when he was tempted, he ate. Jesus had the power to turn stones into bread. And he had every right to do so. He would have broken no law had he done it. But the request to do so came not from God, but from Satan. And so Jesus refused. And besides, Jesus had learned something in the desert. He had learned that human beings don't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Adam did not live by that word. And so he failed. Jesus lived by that word, and he passed his test. And not just the first one. He passed 2 tests after that. He not only succeeded where Adam had failed, he went far beyond Adam's failure. And so Jesus is like Adam, but much improved. You could call him Adam 2.0. This is how Paul understands Jesus. Paul sees as the second Adam. And Jesus doesn't just fix what Adam broke. He goes and does far more. Because for Paul, the effects of Jesus' faithfulness far surpasses, far exceeds any of the consequences of Adam's disobedience. In today's reading from Romans, Paul begins by talking about our human condition. He talks about sin. But for Paul, sin doesn't simply refer to those things that we humans do that are bad or that are wrong. For Paul, sin is a power, a corrupting force, an alien force that has been introduced into creation. You might liken sin to a highly infectious disease that's incurable. Or maybe a new unknown virus that is highly adaptable, easily transmitted, and unstoppable. As Paul writes, sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin. Now, had that been the whole story, there might be some hope for humanity. But there's more. Death spread to all because all sinned. So sin entered into the world through one man. Death entered into the world through sin. Death spread to all people because all people sinned. So according to this logic, if we didn't sin, we'd be just fine. If we never ever sinned, we could escape death. But what are the chances of that? Do you know anybody who has escaped death? Do you know anybody who has gotten out of this life alive? Well, there is one, isn't there? He's why we're here today, Owen. That's the point that Paul's trying to make. There is no escape from the power of sin and death. We are all destined to die, and we can't do anything about it. But God has, God can, and God has. And that's the good news. God has done for us what we could never have done for ourselves. Paul writes, God proves his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And he goes on to say that this free gift is not like the original trespass. This free gift is not like the effect of one man's sin. Salvation isn't simply a balancing of the scales, because Jesus' one act of faithfulness more than compensates for all the consequences of Adam's sin. And Paul is passionate about making this point. And so in today's reading, he's very meticulous. He goes step by step to show just how much the grace of the second Adam tramples and exceeds the sin of the first Adam. Paul reasons this way. If one man's sin led to condemnation and death for all people, then one man's act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all people. And just as by the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous. This picture of salvation that Paul paints is breathtaking in its beauty and in its truth. But there's something about Paul's logic that I don't quite follow, that seems to trip me up. There are times I'm reading Paul and it makes complete sense, and then I reread Paul and it doesn't make any sense at all. I was thinking about that this week. Maybe it's that the gospel sounds too good to be true. But then it hit me. Paul's words don't make sense because they don't square with our picture of reality, with our understanding of how the world works. Because essentially, this is Paul's argument in a nutshell. Adam is like an apple, a rotten apple. And this is a rotten apple. I've been saving it all week for this. Now, tell me, what would happen if I took a rotten apple and put it in a basket full of good apples? What would happen? The good apples would go bad. They would rot. The whole bunch. We even have a saying, one rotten apple spoils the whole bushel. Because in this apple, death is at work. And death is quite contagious. Now, if you follow that logic, if you follow that same logic, what would happen if I took a good apple and put it in a basket full of rotten apples? It should make them all good, right? But you see, that is exactly what Paul is arguing about Jesus. If the one man's sin brought death to all, then the one man's act of righteousness will bring salvation to all. The reason why Paul's argument sometimes makes sense to us is because it doesn't square with our experience. It's not nature as we know it. And actually it's not. It's not nature. It's new creation. And that's the scope of the gospel. Jesus is the one good apple that transforms the whole bushel of rotten apples. Because in Jesus is life. And the life that is working in Jesus, the life that is working through Jesus to renew and restore all of creation, is more aggressive, more adaptive, and more contagious than we could ever imagine. But there's a deep mystery. Because when this good apple gets placed into the batch with all the rotten apples, it doesn't transform it automatically. This apple dies too. This apple dies the same death that all the other apples are dying. Now, if you would, I would invite you to close your eyes for a moment. And I would like you to imagine a landfill. A huge landfill that stretches for miles and miles. This landfill is not filled with trash. It's filled with apples, rotting apples of all shapes and sizes, in various stages of decay and decomposition. And there are thousands of them, millions and billions of them. And they form a huge mound, a huge steaming mountain of rotting apples. Now imagine that the heavens open and a beautiful apple appears. This apple descends and settles down at the very top of the heap. And as you can imagine, this good, beautiful, healthy apple doesn't last very long. It's infected with rot, and it decays and dies like all the rest. seed survives. And this seed burrows down, and after a few days, it sprouts. And so from this rotting heap of apples, a tree begins to grow. An apple tree. It puts down its roots, and it begins to absorb the nutrients left by the other rotting apples. Branches and leaves begin to form as death is transformed into life. The tree grows and becomes quite massive, quite magnificent. And in the spring, blossoms appear. And by late summer, the tree is full of ripe apples, thousands of them, millions and billions of them. Death and decay are no more. Death has been swallowed up by life. And so, the memory of Adam's apple fades away, and the consequences of Adam's sin are no more, because Jesus Christ, the apple tree, has made all things new.